Major Blackwell did not look up when his operations sergeant set the personnel file on the table. He kept his eyes on the satellite imagery spread across the briefing room, one hand tracing the contours of a Syrian valley he had studied so many times the topography had begun to appear in his dreams. Then he picked up the file, opened it, and stared at the photograph clipped to the inside cover for a long moment before setting it down with a kind of controlled deliberateness that said more than anger would have. "Tell me this is a joke," he said. Sergeant Major Craddock, who had been standing in the doorway for exactly as long as it took Blackwell to read the first page, did not answer right away. He had served alongside Blackwell for 11 years, had seen him shot, had seen him carry men twice his weight out of places with no official names, and had learned to distinguish between the anger Blackwell performed and the anger Blackwell felt. This was the second kind. "Soak attached her to Anvil 2 weeks ago," Craddock said. "She goes where we go. She's never deployed. Scout sniper school, top of her cohort, qualified on every platform in the inventory. She's 26 years old and she has never once been shot at." Blackwell closed the file. "I will not learn her name. She will not be with us when we go outside the wire. That is the end of this conversation." Craddock said nothing. He had learned, across those 11 years, that some conversations needed to be filed away for later. The C-17 banked hard over Turkish airspace, and Sergeant First Class Prescott braced her rifle case against her knee and did not look out the window. She had been moving for 31 hours, from Bragg to Ramstein to an airfield with no marking on any public map. And the exhaustion had long since become something structural, something she carried the way others carried old injuries. She was used to it. She had been used to it for years. Her father had taught her to shoot the summer she turned 9, in the hayfields behind their property outside of Winnipeg, with a .22 that had belonged to his own father. He was a quiet man who measured approval in small gestures, a nod, a hand briefly on the shoulder, a silence that felt like warmth rather than absence. And when her first shot clipped the fence post at 70 meters, he gave her that nod and said nothing for a full minute, which was, she had come to understand, the highest praise he knew how to give. Master Warrant Officer James Prescott of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had died on a Tuesday in February, responding to a domestic call at a farmhouse 40 kilometers east of the city. The man inside had a rifle and nothing left to lose. Her father had been wearing his vest. He had gone in the door first because that was what he always did. She had been 17. She had read his citation 300 times since. The loadmaster's voice came over the intercom. 20 minutes. Prescott checked her chamber, the way she always did before landing, not from necessity but from the comfort of ritual. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She had never been able to decide whether that was a gift or something she'd had to hollow herself out to achieve. Craddock met her at the vehicle. He was a large man with a face that had been left in the elements too long, and he looked at her the way a contractor looks at a foundation crack, not with hostility, but with a professional assessment of how much trouble she was going to cause. "Prescott, Sergeant Major." He took her rifle case without asking, which surprised her. "Blackwell's in the TOC. He doesn't want to see you yet. I'll introduce you to the team." "Does he want to see me eventually?" Craddock almost smiled. "We'll find out." Anvil Company's section of the compound was separated from the larger base by a chain of barriers and 2 checkpoints that processed credentials with the blankness of men who had done it 10,000 times. Inside, a low concrete building, a motor pool, a weapons cleaning area that smelled permanently of Hoppy's number 9, and 6 men who stopped what they were doing when Craddock walked her through the door. "Gentlemen." Craddock set her rifle case on a table. "Sergeant First Class Prescott, scout sniper attached for the Hafiz operation. She's ours until further notice." The silence had a texture to it. She had felt silences like this before, in training, in the moments before evaluations, in rooms where she had to recalibrate expectations she had not set, and she had learned to stand inside them without flinching. Staff Sergeant Delgado, Communications, gave a short nod. Corporal Sabo, Demolitions, looked at her rifle case with more interest than he showed in her. Sergeant Otieno, the team medic, met her eyes with something she could not immediately categorize. Not warmth exactly, but attention. The others introduced themselves by rank and name in the flat, efficient way of men who had done too many real introductions to bother performing them. It was Sergeant Jarvis, the team's designated marksman, who spoke first. She the one they're sending instead of Wickham? Wickham's knee is done, Craddock said. Jarvis looked at her. Wickham's been with us for 4 years. I'm aware I'm not Wickham, Prescott said. Good. Jarvis turned back to his rifle. Then we understand each other. Blackwell called her into his office that evening. It was barely an office. A plywood partition, a camp desk, a single lamp that threw everything into the color of old photographs, and he sat behind it with her file open in front of him. Though she had the sense he had already memorized it. He did not offer her a seat. You're here because someone at JSOC decided Anvil needed a female-attached element for the Hafiz operation, he said. There are villages in the target area where a male operator cannot make certain approaches. You are a capability. That is the full extent of my interest in you. He looked up. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You're telling me I'm a tool, not a team member. I'm telling you not to confuse the two. He leaned back. You will attend all briefings. You will maintain your weapons and your physical conditioning. You will not deploy beyond the wire until I determine you are operationally ready. Based on your file, I have significant doubts about that timeline. My file shows I graduated top of cohort at Scout Sniper School. Your file also shows you have never been in a firefight. You have never watched someone die who was standing next to you. You have never had to make a decision in the half second between everything working and everything falling apart. His voice was not unkind. That was almost worse. Competence is not readiness, Sergeant. They are two very different things. I am not willing to stake my men's lives on finding out which one you have. She stood there long enough to make sure he understood she was choosing to accept his terms rather than having no choice. Then she said, What do I need to do to change your assessment, sir? Blackwell looked at her for a moment. Prove you won't freeze. Everything else I can work with. The shooting evaluation came the next morning. They set up targets at 300, 500, 800, and 1,000 meters in crosswind conditions, and Jarvis ran it, not Craddock, which told her something about whom Blackwell had asked to form an opinion. She went through the distances methodically. The wind was reading irregular off the eastern barrier, shifting between 4 and 7 knots, and she took a breath between each shot to recalibrate. At 1,000 meters, she paused longer than she had at the others, feeling the wind on her left cheek, counting her heartbeats, waiting for the natural pause between beats before she squeezed. When the drill was finished, Jarvis walked out to confirm the targets without speaking. He came back and looked at her. Again, twice the pace. She ran the drill 3 more times. On the 4th, Sabo drifted out of the building to watch. By the 5th, even Delgado had set down his radio equipment. She can shoot, Delgado said to no one in particular. Anyone can shoot a range, Jarvis said, but she noticed he said it to the ground rather than to her face, and there was a difference. The physical standards test was harder. The altitude and the accumulated fatigue of travel worked against her on the run, and she finished 40 seconds behind Craddock's mark. She managed 11 pull-ups before her grip gave. The standard for the team was 15. Push-ups, she cleared. Sit-ups, she exceeded. When it was over, she stood with her hands on her knees on the edge of not embarrassing herself, and she heard Sabo's voice, flat and factual. She's not carrying anyone across a mountain. No one asked her to carry anyone, Otieno said. It was not exactly a defense, but the precision of it, the quiet refusal to concede a point that hadn't been made, stayed with her. That night, alone in the room they'd given her, a converted supply closet with a cot and no natural light, she opened the small pouch she kept inside her ruck and took out the thing she carried everywhere. Not a letter. Her father had not left one. What she had was his RCMP service pin, the one they had presented to her mother at the ceremony, the one her mother had pressed into her hand at Bragg with the words, "He'd have wanted you to have something of his that did its job." She held it in her palm and thought about what Blackwell had said. Competence is not readiness. She put the pin away and started her secondary PT routine in the narrow space between the cot and the wall. The first mission brief came 6 days later. The target was Qasim Hafiz, a mid-level logistics commander for a reconstituted cell operating in the Jabal al-Zawiya region, routing materiel across the northern border. He would be at a specific compound for a 48-hour window. The window would not repeat. Blackwell ran the brief with the economy of a man who had run hundreds. 3 buildings, 2 exterior guard posts, a vehicle staging area on the south side. Anvil would insert via helicopter 2 clicks west, move on foot, establish overwatch, then conduct a direct action on the main structure. 12 minutes maximum from breach to extraction. He assigned roles without looking at Prescott. Craddock and Sabo on breach. Jarvis and Delgado flanking. Otieno on standby medical. Captain Haynes coordinating from the top. Then Blackwell closed the briefing folder. Prescott, you're on base. She had expected it. That did not make it easier. The compound has a northern approach that your own assessment identified as a secondary exfil risk, she said. You need overwatch coverage on that vector. I'm aware of my own assessment, Sergeant. Then you know a second shooter on the north ridge gives the breach element full coverage. Without it, you're blind on that side. Blackwell's jaw tightened. You're not deploying, that is not a discussion. Craddock was looking at a spot on the wall that corresponded to nothing. She filed that away. Otieno found her in the armory an hour later, cleaning her rifle for the 3rd time that day. He moved quietly for a large man, which she suspected was professional habit rather than intention. He poured himself coffee from the thermos someone had left on the workbench and did not pretend he had come for anything other than this conversation. He's not wrong about the coverage gap, Otieno said. I know. He's also not wrong that he doesn't know what you'll do under fire. I know that too. Otieno turned the thermos cup in his hands. Blackwell's lost people, not recently, but the kind of losses that reset a person's baseline for acceptable risk. He doesn't extend trust easily because the last time he extended it quickly, someone didn't come home. He said it without editorializing. That's not an excuse, it's a variable. Prescott reassembled her rifle, checked the action, set it down. What's the variable I can change? Nothing tonight. He stood. But tomorrow they go out, and things in this part of the world have a way of not going according to plan. When that happens, the question won't be whether Blackwell trusts you. It'll be whether you're ready. He picked up his coffee. Make sure you are. She was in the TOC when the radio started fracturing. Not because anyone had told her she could be there. Because no one had told her she couldn't, and she understood the distinction, and she had positioned herself in the back of the room with enough quiet competence that the duty sergeant had assumed she belonged. The mission had held together for the first 8 minutes. Then Delgado's voice came through, stripped of everything except information. Contact. East side, multiple armed, prepared positions. They were waiting. Craddock's voice a second later. Zabo's down, I've got Sabo. Blackwell was already on the radio. Prescott unfolded the satellite image on the table beside her. The compound, the northern ridge. The vector she had identified in the brief and then been told to forget about. Breach element is pinned in the courtyard. I need suppression on the eastern roofline. Jarvis, can you get eyes on it? Negative. I'm engaged south, nothing on the east. She looked at the map. The northern ridge gave a clean angle on the eastern roofline, 750 meters, clear line of sight, no intervening terrain. She had memorized this because it was her nature to memorize things she might need. She stepped forward. Sir, she kept her voice low below the radio traffic. I can cover the eastern exposure from the north ridge. Blackwell did not look at her. Negative. Craddock is pinned with a man down. Jarvis is committed south. You have an uncovered fire sector and no one to cover it. I am the option you have right now. The radio, Sabo is losing blood fast. We cannot move him under this. Blackwell turned and looked at her fully for the first time. She held it. Whatever he was calculating, she let him calculate. You get yourself killed, he said, and I will be very unhappy about the paperwork. It was not permission, but it was also not a refusal. She was out the door before he finished the sentence. Private LeMay drove like the road was trying to kill them, which it might have been. Prescott sat in the back, with her rifle across her knees and her window open, reading the terrain against the map she had built in her mind, and when the vehicle stopped at the base of the ridge, she was already out the door. The climb was loose shale and thorn scrub, and she climbed with her rifle slung diagonally across her back, using both hands, testing each step before committing. Her lungs were burning by the halfway point. She did not slow down. She heard the firefight before she crested the ridge, a particular quality of sound, denser, and less organized than anything on a range. The kind that had no equivalent in any training environment, because no training environment could replicate the knowledge that the rounds are trying to find a human body. She found her position, bipod down, scope up. Distance to the eastern roofline, 780, maybe 790 given her elevation. Wind reading off debris moving in the courtyard below. She settled her breathing. The first target was a man with an RPG working his way along the eastern parapet. She exhaled, waited for stillness, squeezed. He went down. Overwatch. Where the hell did that come from? Craddock's voice. North Ridge, she said. I've got the eastern roofline. Move Sabo to the southern wall while I work. A pause, then copy. Moving. She worked. Each shot was its own problem with its own solution. She found the solutions. By the time the breach element had stabilized their position, she had fired 11 rounds. 9 confirmed hits. The exfil was underway when the pickup truck came around the north side of the compound, its mounted gun traversing toward the courtyard. She had perhaps 3 seconds. She aimed for the engine block and fired twice. The truck drifted to a stop against the wall. Overwatch, what's your status? Good. What do you need? North route, is it clear? She scanned. 2 fighters working along the irrigation berm, angling toward the exfil path. She put them both down before they reached the corner. It's clear, she said. Go now. She did not remember the descent. She remembered the helicopter and Otieno's hands on her arm, where a fragment had opened a cut she hadn't noticed, and Craddock sitting across from her, with his rifle between his knees, looking at her with an expression she needed a moment to identify. You were not supposed to be out there, he said. No. How long had you memorized that terrain? Day I arrived. Craddock was quiet. The helicopter banked, and through the open door, the Syrian plateau came into view. Dark except for the distant lights of the compound, one corner of which was still burning where the truck had caught. You did good tonight, Prescott. He said it to the floor. That's all I'm going to say about it. It was, she had already understood, more than most people ever got from Craddock. Blackwell was in his office when she returned, and for a moment after she sat down, he did nothing but look at her arm, where Otieno had taped the bandage. You disobeyed a direct order, he said. Yes, sir. Szabo made it to surgery because of your covering fire. Craddock has said so. Jarvis has said so. I am aware of what you did. Yes, sir. None of that changes the fact that you made a unilateral decision in a combat environment without authorization. In another scenario, that decision cost someone their life. He held her gaze. Do you understand the distinction I'm drawing? I understand that the right outcome and the right process can be 2 different things, sir. Blackwell studied her for a long moment. Something was shifting behind his eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but a willingness to revise. She had seen it before, the specific moment when someone who has already decided something has to admit the decision was made on incomplete information. The gap in our Overwatch coverage, he said finally. That was a planning failure on my part. She said nothing. It did not require a response. You identified it in the brief. I dismissed it because you identified it. He stood, moved to the window. Outside, the base was coming back to life. Engines, voices, the first pale line of dawn on the eastern ridgeline. That is not a habit I can afford. He turned back. You'll be in the planning cycle for the next operation, full access. He paused. That's not the same as trust, Prescott. Trust gets built over time, but it's a beginning. She stood. Understood, sir. Get some sleep. Otieno says you need at least a week before that arm is combat ready. 4 days. Blackwell almost smiled. We'll negotiate. The second operation was the one that nearly came apart entirely. The target was a logistics node 30 kilometers north, a farm compound being used as a staging area for the cell's eastern supply chain. Intelligence had triple verified the location through 3 independent sources. What intelligence had not accounted for was that one of those sources had been feeding information in both directions for 11 months. They walked into a kill zone that had been arranged with patience and care. The ambush came from the tree line on the western approach, timed to catch the team in the open ground between the access road and the outer wall. Delgado went down in the first 30 seconds, not dead, but his leg unable to hold weight, his radio shot through. Jarvis got him behind a berm and started working the western tree line. Szabo, still moving on the residual adrenaline of a man whose surgical staples were barely a week old, set up on the south corner and started identifying firing positions. Prescott was already on the eastern ridge, her assigned overwatch. Through her scope, she watched the tactical picture reorganize itself in real time, the way a coherent plan dissolves into a collection of individual problems, each one requiring a separate solution, none of them waiting for the others to be solved first. Craddock, I've got 8 to 10 fighters working a flanking route along the eastern irrigation channel. They'll reach your position in 4 minutes. Can you slow them down? I can stop them. How long do you need? Give me 6. She gave him 7. By the time the flanking element reached the end of the channel, 3 of them were no longer moving, and the remaining 5 had dispersed into cover that cost them their momentum. The team used the time to reconsolidate, get Delgado moving with support, and establish a fire base on the north wall. But the exfil route was compromised, 2 vehicles blocking the access road, more fighters streaming in from the north. Prescott, Blackwell, from the T, can you clear the road? She looked through her scope. The vehicles sat nose to nose across the tarmac, fighters using them for cover. The lead driver was still in his seat. Give me 45 seconds. You've got 30. She put a round through the lead vehicle's radiator, then the rear tires on the second. The fighters scattered. Craddock's voice. Road is passable. Moving now. They got out. Not cleanly, nothing about it was clean, but they got out. And when the helicopter climbed and the compound grew small below her, she sat with her hand over the pouch inside her ruck without taking out its contents. She did not need to. She already knew what her father would have said. You didn't do it perfectly, but you did it, and everyone's still here. That was always enough for him. 3 days later, after Delgado was out of surgery and Sabo had been cleared for light duty, Craddock called the team together in the main room. He did it without Blackwell, which said something about what it was for. He set a team patch on the table in front of Prescott, the Anvil Company insignia, with her name stenciled on the reverse in the same block lettering as everyone else's. Team voted, he said. You're in, no conditions, no evaluation period. He picked up his coffee. Don't make me regret the paperwork. She looked at the patch. She picked it up. The room held the particular quiet of people who have been through something together and don't need to perform the significance of it. Thank you, she said. Sabo said, she buys the first round when we're back somewhere that's legal. Obviously, Delgado said from the doorway, moving on a single crutch, looking aggrieved that he had nearly missed it. She called her mother from the secure satellite phone that evening. The connection was poor the way it always was, and her mother's voice came through in pieces. Are you all right? I'm all right. Are you sure? I'm sure. A pause. The kind her mother had learned over years of waiting for calls that sometimes didn't come, of knowing there were things that couldn't be asked and things that couldn't be answered, and that love had to travel through the silence between those things. Your father would be proud of you, her mother said. Prescott looked at the service pin in her palm. The brass was warm from being held. I know, she said. I think he'd also tell me not to push it. Her mother laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. He'd say exactly that. And then he'd go right back out the next morning anyway. Yet Prescott said he would. Blackwell found her afterward, standing outside in the last of the evening light. He stood beside her without preamble, looking at the same middle distance, the way two people who have reached an understanding often stop needing to face each other to confirm it. The Hafiz network still has 3 active nodes, he said. I know. Suki wants Anvil on all 3 before the end of the month. She nodded. You'll be primary overwatch on each one. He paused. That's not a question. No, sir, it's not. He was quiet for a while. A helicopter passed overhead, routine resupply, nothing urgent, and they both tracked it out of professional habit, then looked back at the horizon. You asked me when you arrived what you'd need to do to change my assessment, he said. Yes. I told you to prove you wouldn't freeze. You did. You didn't freeze. He said it with the bluntness of a man who had learned the relief of saying the accurate thing rather than the generous one. What you did out there, under fire, with incomplete information and no authority, training doesn't give you that. Training just tells you whether you have it. He looked at her, brief and direct. You have it. It was not an apology. She had not expected one. It was something more durable than an apology. An adjustment, a recalibration, the specific acknowledgement of a man who held his judgments carefully and changed them only when the evidence became impossible to argue with. She had spent 11 years trying to become evidence that was impossible to argue with. She thought about her father, the hayfield, the fence post at 70 meters, the nod that meant everything. She thought about how he had never needed her to be more than what she already was. He had just needed her to know it herself. The work was not finished. 3 nodes remaining, each a different problem, each requiring the same willingness to be exactly where she was supposed to be at the exact moment she was supposed to be there. She was not at the beginning anymore. She was not proving anything to anyone. She was operating. And in Anvil Company, she was learning. That was the only language that had ever truly mattered.